Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Warriors Stock Report. Tim Bontemps from ESPN here with my buddy Anthony Slater. Slater, we ended the last stock report going into this stretch of three games against teams the Warriors should handle with me saying that I thought the Warriors should go 3-0 in these games if they wanted to be taken as a serious team in the Western Conference. And they did not. They went 1-2. Very disappointing loss in Indy. Gave the Pacers their first win of the season. I think maybe still their only win of the
Yeah,
season, if I
yeah.
remember correctly.
I believe I saw the Nets go into Indy and pop them
Yes, that's right. The Nets
the
got
other
their
day.
first
So
win in Indy a few days later. They then beat the Phoenix Suns on Tuesday at home, and then they came over to your neck of the woods the next night, Wednesday night. Warriors Kings battle for Northern California. Russell Westbrook had a triple double, declared himself the best rebounding guard of all time, had a back and forth with you, and the Kings win the game. So now the Warriors sit here. It's on Friday morning. Warriors are going to play Denver Friday night.
yes,
Extremely disappointing week, I would say, in Warriors land. And while the stock is obviously down across the board, I would say at the moment, what is your take on where things sit after a couple of really poor performances in recent days for this group?
obviously, like you said, bad week. 5-4 is not where they wanted to be through 9 games, and especially when they were 4-1. The glass half full would be, hey, like, look what's going on just physically right now. Jimmy Butler went up for a dunk in Indy, back tightened up. He's basically missed the last 2 games. He played 14 ineffective minutes against Phoenix and then basically asked out of the game. Draymond didn't play in the Sacramento game, and then Steph, like, look, he's got like legitimately like pretty badly sick. Missed or played in the Phoenix game and was like exhausted in the second half, still puttered to the finish line, and then is going to miss this Denver game tonight, missed the Sacramento game, obviously. So it's like, there's health reasons for at least some of these like fading struggles. So that's glass half full. Glass half empty is like, it's 9 games in. It's 9 games in, and Steve Kerr's on the podium talking about a team being wiped out. We can get to stock down on Al Horford with the way he's playing, but also the way they have to limit his minutes and his games played, which I think is impacting his rhythm. But it's again, yes, they are going through a grueling patch of the schedule, and sure, the league put maybe their roughest 20-game stretch as their first 20 games, just from a travel perspective, so that has something to do with it. But they have not even got to the 6-game road trip. That's the hardest part of it, and we're already talking about the grueling grind of an 82-game stretch. Well, it's 9 games in. That's my
Yeah,
thing right now. That's where the alarm is, like, already the schedule is just piling up. And again, I understand a sickness is a sickness, particularly when we're talking about Steph. And if Steph was scorching hot right now instead of sick in bed, it probably looks different, but it's got to be a mini alarm.
yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was sitting here this morning watching back the Clippers Suns game from Thursday night, the one game on the schedule. It's my
Weird, by the way.
anniversary. My
I
anniversary
would.
yesterday, so I didn't watch the game yesterday. Went out to dinner
Did
with
the
my
league do
wife.
that for you? Did the league do
Maybe
that for you?
they might have done it for me. I was very happy when I looked at the schedule. Other than that, I had to try to come up with three things to watch in the NBA, and I had to pick them all from that game, which was a bit of an adventure. But
Yeah, I
uh,
think I saw you're like Mark Williams has had like a
there
positive
was
start to the
I
season.
had to stretch it a little bit. It'll be a lot easier on Friday with Victor going to Houston, playing against Houston, and a bunch of other stuff going on. But uh, I was watching Clippers Suns and thinking about doing the stock report, and I went into the season very high on the Clippers and very high on the Warriors. And I thought the Warriors had a higher playoff ceiling, and I still do, than the Clippers. But there was a fear with both teams that we talked about going back to the start of camp that are they going to get into the season and are they going to start to struggle going through the 82 games with a bunch of old players that you have to manage? You mentioned Al Horford. You got to manage Jimmy Butler. You got to manage Draymond Green. You got to manage Steph Curry. Like, we're like you said, we're only a couple weeks in. Yes, the Warriors have a bunch of travel. They've had a few back to backs. On the other hand, you can't really afford to give away back to backs or give away games in the Western Conference. The Warriors have given away a couple of really bad games. You saw Steve Kerr get pretty frustrated after that Milwaukee, Indiana trip. I watched your back and forth with him that you posted, and he was just clearly frustrated, understandably so, losing to the completely dilapidated Pacers and the
The
Bucks without
the Pacers
Giannis.
one. The Bucks one, there was like a little bit of like, man, like like Milwaukee did kind of play really well and
They
energized, and the
did,
Warriors,
but you can't go 0-2 against a non-Giannis Bucks team and then the half the Pacers. You just
no doubt.
can't. You can't for where the Warriors are trying to
Yeah.
go, trying to avoid having to be in some dogfight to avoid the play in March and April to have home court in the playoffs. Like they can't they can't be doing stuff like this. And yes, there are a lot of circumstances right now, but like you said, that's also part of what happens when you build a team led by 35 plus players. And it's the necessary reality that they're probably going to be staring at most of the season.
Yeah, the Pacers one though, I remember going into the Milwaukee game. It's fresh off a flight. They're 4-1. You could tell at shoot around Steve was at least mildly concerned about how they might come out. And then the honest thing, whatever.
Yeah, and we talked
Uh,
about that last week.
yeah.
Obviously, it's always weird when a guy is a late scratch and is a star player and then he doesn't play. It usually messes a team up. So that wasn't a stunner.
The Pacers one right now is the one that has really screwed up their early season for a variety of reasons. Number one, as Steve Kerr mentioned post game, he gave them the day off prior. He gave them shoot around. They should not have been fatigued, tired, unfocused in that game. That was a game where if you are around the team on like a minute by minute basis, it was like, oh, you need to come out and pop this Pacers team like everybody else in the league is doing. And if you actually look at that game, the young guys like perform well. You got like the Guy Santos boost off the bench. There was a point that Steve took Steph Curry out very early, like 6 minutes into the third quarter after kind of a bad start to the half. And I think they were down whatever a few, and then by the time he sat him 12 full minutes. I haven't seen this last six of the third, basically first six of the fourth, and by the time Steph got back in, they're up 9 or 8 or 9, and it's like, okay, like you haven't not even played well to this point. You're up six, you're facing a depleted Pacers team. Just putter this thing to the finish line, and they completely collapsed against like Quentin Jackson.
What? Here's all you got to say. This is a few days ago, but I'm looking at the box score right now. Quentin Jackson, interesting athletic two-way guard, but again, a two-way guard, right? After Ryan Rollins, a very interesting young player, but still a young, unproven player, went crazy the game before. 25 points, 10 assists, 10 for 16 from the field, 31 minutes, plus 20. Steph Curry in the same game, 24 points, 2 assists, 5 turnovers, 4 for 16 from three, minus 21.
Yeah.
Like, and I know Steph put it on himself after the game, as you'd expect, but like the Warriors can't have that in that game.
Look, they're
They
6-3. They're 6-3 if they just like finish the job there. And
Yes.
like that's not fantastic. We're not coming on here like, well, look at these. They're
No, but it
steaming in
feels a
the early
lot.
season.
It feels a lot
That's
different than 5-4 with now Jimmy Butler dealing with a back thing and Steph now missing this Denver game. It's very likely. I mean, again, we just talked about a couple crazy results, right? So it could be another way. But you go into this game Friday night, you expect the Warriors to be 5-5. Like that's not good. 10 games in, obviously, given where the expectation is, they're going to have to be from a win standpoint to be a home court advantage team in the West and to have as easy a path as they can get through what's going to be a difficult run through the playoffs if they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the last several seasons, really since 22, they built such a big cushion early. They went 18-2 that they were able to just like withstand a really bad March. I think at one point they lost like seven or
Right.
eight
They could
games.
manage the season because they had the good start, which again is
Yeah.
what they were hoping to do this year and why you can't give away games like
Well,
these.
yeah, and the season's wacky. Last year, they come out to 12-3 and they're like mission accomplished. You know that meme with what is it, Bush with they were doing that
Yes.
at 12-3 last year.
On the
And
and the
then,
aircraft carrier.
yes, I've never seen a season flip quite as quickly where they went 3-12 over the next 15 and they were at 15-15 and mission was not accomplished.
No.
So like they could have a really hot stretch come. They could surprise on this road trip, but again, a lot of this early season gauntlet they're talking about is about to happen. So, that is where the concern level is. And you could pinpoint the young guys, and we could talk about some of them in the Sacramento game. That was winnable. No Zach LaVine, no Domantas Sabonis. Obviously, nobody on the Warriors side, none of their headliners. But
Well, yeah, and it obviously is different when those guys are all out when you look at it later and say, well, they lost a close game to Sacramento without the old guys. But again, that's the kind of game they
winnable
have to
game.
find a way to win. Yes.
I think they were like 2.5 point dogs. Like it was considered a toss up, even in the arena pregame. It's like
Yeah.
this is kind of intriguing what might happen. And the way Kerr framed it post game is he felt it was like a veteran win by the Kings, where their vets, the Schroeders, Westbrooks late kind of took control, where the Warriors young guys faltered, Kuminga, Pajemski, and others. There was some good, stock up type stuff within that game. We can Will Richard 30 points. But
I think he's going to
let
remain
me
in the rotation.
We'll see. I think he's gonna. I think he'll play in Denver tonight, especially with no Steph. Steve is still, I think, doing a little of the hierarchy stuff. But let's get to. I wanted to talk Al Horford with you because, you were around Al Horford a ton in the Eastern Conference the last decade or so. He has only played 6 of the 9 games, which is a problem in itself. He's, limited to this 20, 22-ish minutes, which we talked about, which isn't that new to Al Horford. But
No.
within that, obviously, without a rhythm, he's just not playing very well. Minus 37, I think, in his minutes. I thought he was actually okay in the Sacramento game, except for the fact that he went 0-7 from three and some
Yes.
huge threes that he missed. So like the shot is not there. Like I said, 5 of 24. Where like are you surprised about this? I mean, you've talked about how he rises in big matchups, and like the one of his good 6 games so far has been that Denver overtime game where he was excellent in that game. Big threes, guarded Jokic. But what's your concern level about how he's playing?
I would say that the key number there, right, is he's played 6 games and taken 24 threes. So if he made one more three each game, he's 11 for 24 and he's shooting 45%, right? Instead, he's 5 for 24 and he's shooting 20%. And so his numbers look awful, right? And he's a big minus on the court. I think to your point, the Denver game, I think is emblematic of what Al can do in the playoffs and against real teams during the season. But look, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Watching the Clippers last night, I was watching Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez looks very old, right? Another guy who's had a great career, was going to come in, play a role with the Clippers. And I know I keep talking about the Clippers, but I was thinking about it both today because the two teams are in a very similar spot. And there is, I think, there should be a fear that Al Horford might have just gotten old and might just not be good. And if that happens, then the Warriors are in a lot of trouble because they need Al Horford to be good if they want to get where they want to go. I would still bet that when the rubber hits the road and the games really matter, Al Horford's going to be pretty good for Golden State because he knows how to play. He's still an excellent post defender. He can still move his feet enough. I think he'll hit shots in big games. And I think he'll be able to fill in as a complementary piece when they need him to. But it's just, I keep saying the same thing, but it really is the story this whole season. If you're built on a bunch of 35 plus guys, you have to be aware of the possibility that people turn into pumpkins overnight, which happens in the NBA regularly. And I think, I think you can
Well,
attribute a lot of this to Al Horford just missing threes that he'll probably start hitting, but it's, I think, something you have to be cognizant of and concerned about if you're a Warriors fan.
well, this is what I want to ask about with the Horford thing. Part of, I think, the issue right now, he came to play in this like veteran system with Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler and Draymond
Yep.
Green.
Yep.
I think in his mind probably start and still probably will when the games matter and they keep talking about, hey, like just get him to April, manage him to that point. But at some point he has to get a rhythm with these guys. He has to play with them. The fact that he's coming off the bench, he's in wacky lineup combinations. He's not playing, a third of the games, partly because of all the back-to-backs early in the season
Yep.
for them. At what point, despite it being the regular season, do you throttle up a little bit just to get him a good feeling and some comfort around these guys and say, Al Horford, you're starting and you're playing next to the veterans, and maybe you're playing 25 to 28 minutes a night for a couple weeks. Certainly you're going to sit him on a back-to-back, whatever. You can still manage within
Yep.
that, but like he should play with the guys he came to play with at some point because those are the guys he can't just like, hey, in April, this is like your 90th minute of the season with Steph Curry on the floor.
I have been really surprised Al Horford isn't starting. And I think a lot of this goes back to your boy. I think it goes back to the Jonathan Kuminga situation slash problem slash experiment. And I think the fact that Kuminga has played well, and he has played well, and the Warriors are leaning into trying to make this thing work, at least in the short term and maybe potentially in the medium term. Because as we've talked about, there are not a lot of obvious trades for Jonathan Kuminga in January. And while I think a trade is certainly possible, I wouldn't say it's a certainty. So you have to kind of go forward with the idea that this guy might be with the team and you have to try to have him be integrated. And as we've talked about, he does things that fit in a very specific way that can be positive for this group, right? But if you're starting Jonathan Kuminga, you can't really start Al Horford.
You
And
can. So I would have said yes early in the season, but they've been starting Quentin Post for the stretch center, and those lineups it could just be Al. I
that's
would
I
have
mean that's true and that I would say, but in general, right? Just in general, I don't think you can really to me I know they've been doing the Quentin Post thing. I do think it's going to be hard to essentially play Jonathan Kuminga at shooting guard, which or Jimmy Butler who
well
doesn't
he
shoot threes at shooting guard
that's who's
and
been
have
playing shooting guard with
I
Quentin Post out
nah,
there.
I know. I mean,
Which
look,
I think is a separate. I'm not even saying it's not an issue, but that's separate from the Al Horford issue, in my opinion.
I yes, I agree with that, but and that's fair, but I do think I guess what I would say is I think and I haven't talked to Steve about it, so I don't know if this is true or not. But when Steve made the declaration that Kuminga was going to start, now it's going to basically come off the bench, right? To me, that felt at the time like a recognition of, hey, let's just give Jonathan this spot. Let's get Al into a role where he can play every game and sort of know what his role is going to be and try to get him acclimated that way, right? But to your point, this is not the first time where, for all of Steve Kerr's strengths as a coach, the fact that for a long stretch of his coaching tenure, there has not been a lot of consistent rotations and a lot of consistent minutes. Again, to go back to Jonathan Kuminga, something that the Kuminga camp has openly been frustrated about at times. And I think there's been some justification for that. I think for somebody like Al, a guy who at this point basically is just a spot up shooter on offense, right? And a connector. Well, if you're playing with two or three different guys every game, I think it stands to reason you're probably going to not have the same rhythm to your point that you would have if you were in the starting lineup and you were playing with Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green and Steph Curry on a regular basis and you were getting familiar with those guys. So, yeah, I do think that's something that the Warriors should think about at some point. And I'm still surprised that he's not starting. I thought he would just start the games that he was going to play in and play 20 to 24 minutes, and that's what he would do. Um, but the Warriors sort of like this is a very random tangent, but the last couple of years, the Heat have often felt like they've had 10 to 12 guys, and a lot of coaches want to play nine. And so you end up doing a lot of experimenting with the last couple spots. And if guys aren't playing well, you could shuffle a new guy in and you can keep trying new things to see if you find the right mix. And the Warriors kind of feel like a team that have 11 or 12 guys that Steve likes, but you can't really play 11 or 12 guys. And so now you've got Will Richard playing well. You've got Kuminga playing well. You've got, Quentin Post has established himself as a guy who can play in
Moody's
rotation.
back and
Moody's
shooting it.
back and playing well. So they've got a lot of guys for Steve to choose from. And you've also got these older players who are cycling in and out of the lineup. And I do think it makes it very difficult for anybody to establish a real rhythm. And I think that's especially true for somebody like Al Horford, who has spent most of the past decade playing with one team, oftentimes with at least two or three or four of the same guys over many years.
Stable lineup, a pretty
stable
stable
lineups. And, the one period where it didn't look great was when he had the failed experiment in Philly, which he was much younger, but it was kind of the same thing where the fit with Joel was just never right. And it was very awkward. And there was a lot of uncertainty about how it should go and what it should look like and who should be where and how it should go. And I think if this looks a lot different to me, if Al Horford has made 4 or 5 more threes and he's shooting around 40% from three instead of 20. But if this
I just
continues,
don't feel like
I
we've
think
even we haven't seen the Al Horford that was the theory this summer, which was playing with the vets. Now I will say we mentioned the Denver game where he did play well. Remember who closed that game? It was very interesting. It was the jumbo lineup, which it's funny because it's like it's more just like modern NBA size, but for the Warriors it's this like monster lineup, and it was Kuminga, Butler, Draymond, Allen with Steph. And you haven't seen it that much. And I
They
do.
might need to they might need to try it. To your point. They
Yeah.
might need to just go to that. I mean, it is going to be interesting. And look, like I wrote a story at the start of last season about Philadelphia's goal to manage its way to a championship, essentially, right? And they were going to manage Paul George and manage Joel Embiid and do all this stuff. And obviously, that couldn't have gone worse, right? But the overall concept of it isn't a lot different than what Golden State's trying to do. Now, Golden State has, you know, an all-time great player in Steph Curry. They have guys who've done it in the playoffs in a way that team didn't. I'm not trying to compare Philadelphia and Golden State before people
Yeah.
go
They
crazy,
also
but
don't have like the underlying, like really concerning like body part either. But
no,
generally, I
that's
know what you're
true.
talking.
But that's what I was going to say. The situations are far different. But I think the thing that's similar is if you're trying to manage your way through an 82 game season, especially in today's NBA where there's a lot of very young teams, the league is younger than ever, the league is more physical than ever, the league is bigger than ever, right?
Faster, which they keep
Faster
talking
than
about.
ever.
Tempo.
Golden State is not very fast. They're pretty old. They're pretty small, and they have to manage a lot of guys on a nightly basis. So you put all that together, and that's why when they got off to the five and the I guess 4-1 start, you're
Yeah.
like, all right, now you're going into kind of a soft stretch of the schedule. Maybe they could be 7-2. Maybe they could be 8-1 when Giannis gets knocked out of that game. You're thinking, oh, they could win 3 or 4 games in a row. All of a sudden, they get on a roll, they get in a rhythm, they get out to a start like they did last year, they get some air. They're probably not catching the Thunder, but maybe they could finish second in the West. And, they can set themselves up to have the most optimal road possible in the playoffs. But a week later, Jimmy's hurt, Steph's sick. They've lost 3 or 4. It could be 4 or 5. Al Horford's not making any shots. Draymond Green so far shooting 42% from three amid all this. That's probably not going to continue. Jonathan Kuminga shooting 42% from three. Maybe that'll continue, but probably won't based off his history. So this, I think, is sort of what the rhythm of their season is going to be. And they're going to be wild swings both ways. And they're going to play awesome against the Denvers and the Oklahoma Cities, I bet, and the San Antonios and the Houstons, the teams they really get up for and they're ready to go for. And then there's probably going to be games against the teams they've lost, the Sacramentos, the Indianas, the Milwaukee's without Giannis, where they let their foot off the gas. They look kind of old. They don't have it on a night because they just can't summon the energy, and they lose games they should.
Yeah. I mean, it's trending very early, but it's trending towards a little bit what the last few seasons have been, which is just standing watch on a nightly basis in March and April, and every result matters up until the final weekend. And they're trying to avoid the play in, and I don't know. I remember last year it was the last week it was like so, or they had to find a way to avoid the play, and it was going to matter so much. And in some
Yep.
ways, it was like by the time you got there, it's like, just go beat a Grizzlies team at home that you should beat, and you get the Rockets in the first round, which is a pretty good matchup, and you beat the Rockets. And some people, I mean, you take 2 steps back, you're like, honestly, like being in the play-in and having a fortunate matchup and still getting 5 days off prior to a Rockets series where you just went in and won game one pretty handily. It's really not that like dooming of a situation. But then you remember what happens in the second round with the Curry hamstring tweak, and you do wonder, was it just because of how big of a war that first round with the Rockets was? And regardless of the break you had before, going from the game 7 to the game 1 is what caused it? Or do you wonder, is it because you were sprinting from March to that moment? Um, but
It's all
yeah,
compounding, right? Like it all matters, and it's part of why these individual games matter. It's why like this week could end up mattering down the road. Um, you know, it's what's going to make it, like you said, probably a very interesting full 82 games, and it's probably going to go in a similar manner to the way the last couple years have gone, like you said. Now, before we go, we should
yeah,
talk about Will Richard, and we should talk about this rotation overall for the same reason we just talked about, where the Warriors have a lot of guys to fit into not necessarily a lot of spots. Um, Obviously, the 30-point game in Sacramento was great. He's been a fantastic story for them so far as yet another pick in the 50s. Mike Dunleavy, again, doing a great job getting a guy that can play in the 50s, which is pretty unheard of. He's done it 3 years in a row now. But when I said seems like he's going to stay in the rotation, you were like, we'll see. And there's a lot of guys they could choose from. So what do you kind of see again, assuming Jimmy's back in short order and good and stays in the lineup, assuming the Steph illness thing doesn't linger, where do you see things sitting at this point in terms of how the general rotation on a nightly basis is going to go?
Yeah, I think Will Richard and Moody are rising. Moody, a few pecking order spots ahead of Richard rising, where Richard's more rising from like the 11th, 12th guy towards like, 8, 9. Gary Payton, if somebody's got to fall, Gary Payton, I would say early in the season. I think he got a DMP a couple games ago. Wasn't that great in the Sacramento game. He seems to be stumbling a little bit. You wonder about Buddy Hield's minutes. Pajemski's, featured a lot, gets a lot of minutes. He's been a little bit up and down. But if Will Richard is going to, eat in, full rotation wise, look, Steph Curry's not playing in Denver tonight. That opens up 34. But let's say everybody is available on a theoretical night in Oklahoma City early next week. If Will Richard is going to get minutes, who is going to be shaved away? Obviously, we will constantly look at Jonathan Kuminga's minute totals. They remain really high to this point. I'd say his second, third week of the season was not as good as his first week and a half. But still, like
He's still
I'd
averaging
say,
17 and 7,
yeah,
7 on 51% and 41%.
the,
If he keeps
the
doing
offense,
that,
yeah,
he, you know,
he's rebounding and the offense is good. Like the shot looks like confident right
yep.
now. He does stuff as we've talked. We don't need to get into it, but he does
Nope.
stuff that they don't have. Now, I will say, like they're behind the scenes trying to get like individually, defensively. They've given him big assignments. I think they want more from him on that end, and he has to continue to give more on that end to, I would say, to maintain like the 32 to 34 minute type thing. But like with Will Richard, I mean, what are you seeing?
I mean, he's just a guy that looks like a 4-year college player that has stepped in and immediately been able to fill a role, right? And Steve has always valued guys who know kind of how to play and what to do, right? And he's a low turnover guy who makes smart decisions, who knows how to play. He's obviously just won a title with Florida, like has experience in big games, and has not looked out of place with this Warriors team. So, but again, this goes back to I think what we talked about earlier, and what I do think is the interesting thing to watch is Steve likes to play a lot of guys. He likes a lot of people to feel involved, and he has the ability to play a lot of guys now. And so, how does that manifest itself over the year? And how, does that prevent guys from getting into a rhythm across the board? And you're the whole Al Horford discussion is a big part of that. Brandon Pajemski is part of that. Kuminga, if he slips at all, is part of that. Moses Moody, we talked going into the start of the season. If he doesn't hurt his calf, there's a pretty good chance he's starting at the start of
He's
the
looked
year.
really good.
And he's looked
He's looked
really
really
good since
good.
he came back. So does he get more minutes? Like that's the thing. It's going to be very difficult. NBA players tend to really crave consistency. It's part of what has caused some of the controversy in Memphis, right? That Tomas Isalo is doing things differently from shorter substitution patterns and more interchanging of players than we typically see in the NBA. And guys don't like that. And it's been something that's, has been an issue with players with Steve in the past. So I think, and it's only going to be exacerbated by having an older team and having a lot of options and having the ability to do a lot of different things. So I think beyond the macro of the health of the older players and how do they look and how does Al start to play better, I do think the underlying thing is you've got a lot of young guys who are trying to establish themselves and get minutes and play and find roles. And you're trying to navigate the season and get through it in the best way possible. And how does everybody come through that and manage that and settle into consistent roles on this team? I think, like we were talking about the race for playoff positioning in the West going right down to the end of the season, I'm not certain we're going to have a very consistent Warriors rotation from now until the end of the season either, for all the reasons we just laid out.
You said one key within your Will Richard analysis, low turnover guy. And that's particularly what Steve Kerr's looking at right now. I think they had 19 for 30 Kings points the other night. That when they've been bad, really, I was going to this season, but when they've been bad forever, it's when they're high turnovers. And it's what
And you got
he's,
Steph, Kuminga, and Draymond combining for 9 a game.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And, that's what he loves about Jimmy. That's why it's like they
right.
want as engaged. and controlling of a Jimmy Butler on any given night that they can get. But you don't want your role guys turning it over a few times a game. And Will Richard, you got the stats up. How many turnovers does Will Richard even have this
zero point
season?
0.7 per game. So I would guess he's got 5 in 7 games. I will tell you right now,
Yeah.
Will Richard in 7 games is he's got 5 turnovers. He's got 11 assists, 9 steals, and 5 turnovers.
Yeah.
If he can continue to have more steals than turnovers, Steve will be very happy.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Well, Denver in a cup game, big cup game tonight.
Big cup game could be the end of the Warriors run in the cup. Basically, if they lose this game, which I'd say there's a pretty good chance they will, given they're on the road
They're
in
at
Denver.
San Antonio next Friday in a cup game too.
That is true, but we have seen stranger things happen, including in the last week. So who knows how this will go? But yeah, I mean, look, we just talked about this soft stretch of the schedule. Part of the reason that was so critical is because in the West, you always have to be afraid of what is coming around the corner for you. And over the next few days, Golden State has a pretty rough schedule. I mean, they're playing in Denver today. They come home to get Indiana on Sunday, and then it's at Oklahoma City, and then a baseball series in San Antonio with the first game on the second night of a back-to-back after playing the Thunder. That's the definition of a schedule loss. So, this could very quickly slide into a pretty hefty amount of losses in a very short amount of time. And that is not great for a team that was hoping to, as you said earlier, establish itself with some solid positioning in the West.
I'll say 2 things. The Pacers game Sunday is pretty important.
That is a must. That is a must win.
Take care of business that night, and then I believe we'll probably talk to y'all after the Tuesday, Wednesday Thunder.
I would think
Spurs
so. Next Thursday,
yeah.
I would think
do
so.
That. Yeah,
we'll do.
We'll have some interesting intel, and that'll be cool because like you said, the baseball series. I always love the in season where it's like you play a team, and then you can spend a couple off days, discussing actual matchups. Like it's almost like a mini playoff series.
Well, but the thing is, and we'll go after this because we both have to get on with our days. But at this point, I would be pretty surprised if we have anything to talk about from that first Spurs game because I would expect nobody plays for Golden State.
We'll see. I think Steph, they're giving Steph a little runway off right now to like get the body right. And what you mentioned, the concern of losses piling up, the desire not to get in an early season hole.
I mean, you
have to balance it.
That's true, but you're in a stretch of 8 games on the road out of 9, and then like you said, in the middle of at that point will be a 6-game road trip for, the better part of 10 days. So, I mean, that's why they can't give away these games. To go back to the beginning, it's why it's why it's going to make for a very interesting season. So we'll see. All right. Well, thanks, Slater. Thanks for fitting it in. Appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend out in Northern California. Thank you to everybody for watching this week's edition of the Stock Report. We'll be back with you next week when Slater is on site in San Antonio, and we'll see where the Warriors world turns between now and then. NBA on ESPN.